Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to BellaV TV. I'm your host, Amanda Caniglia. I'm here joined with co-host Dr. Kat and Alexis Dixon. So this is Expressions. We are super jazzed. We think you are going to be blown away by the writer and director of the film #Like. Kat, Alexis, what do you guys think?
Dr. Kat, what are your thoughts?
The complexity of the film and the complexity of the emotions that she evokes from the viewer, it's just phenomenal and so timely given the topic. Alexis?
Well, it's also the kind of film where when the film is over, the movie continues, the film continues in your mind. So at the end of the film, you carry this with you. And I found myself having a conversation with the characters. And so I was very excited to watch not just what was on the screen, but how I lived with it after it was over.
I've been doing a lot of artwork. I made this one with my own little hands. I went online. He was on there again. When he said he was gonna buy one for me, I got really creeped out. What if he comes to my house?
There's this man that has been bothering my sister.
How old's your sister?
13. Amelia Danvers.
I'm really sorry for your loss.
Why are you trying to find this guy?
Just don't worry about it.
You need to be careful.
Yeah, girl, he is a sex offender.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make him pay.
This guy definitely doesn't want to be found. Some real dark net stuff.
He was taking pictures of little kids. Are you sure it's him though?
No, it's him. You have to help me get rid of him.
No way, no way. You need to call the cops.
You know what I have been through.
Yeah, I got a call.
That was my mom. Sorry, she had to run out. Here you go.
Come on, it's the weekend.
Creepy, right?
Solid lead door. When is your mom gonna be home?
What would you do if this was your sister?
So welcome, guys. Welcome back. And please, we have the honor to introduce you to writer and director, Sarah Pirozek.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to have a conversation about the film.
Yeah. I think I just wanted to start off first talking about the genre, right? I've never seen this label, this genre of feminist noir thriller. What does that mean? I tried to dress like
I know. Well, I think I invented it, but I'm sure there are like 2 or 3 other movies that attempt the same thing. I knew that when I was making this film, it would be a micro budget. I also knew I started putting together the concept of this film before the Me Too wave, which seems like forever ago. Isn't that forever? But it's 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And I was putting the film together, and there was a real confidence gap in funding female-helmed pictures, writers, directors, that sort of thing, even a women-driven narrative or a girl-driven narrative. So I thought the way to get it made when I was looking for funding to get any kind of fiscal sponsorship was to make it a genre movie, which is more commercial. It has legs to maybe get out into the world on different platforms. And so you can dig into issues that you want to when you make it a thriller or a horror or even a rom-com. I mean, look at what the rom-com girls have done. So that was that part of the puzzle was, okay, let me make it a genre movie about something I care about. And I've been reading and going down that 2 a.m. rabbit hole when you're about to go to bed and you're still on the internet and you read some horrible story. And I've been reading about predation on the internet for, affecting young people, mainly girls, but boys too. And it really infuriated me. But I I didn't feel we needed another documentary about it. There are some very decent documentaries out there about it. And I thought also, if I make it genre, it's going to be a Trojan horse of sorts that's going to appeal to young people and potentially their parents, their hip parents who are watching Netflix and might click into this. So, yeah. And then feminist, because it's my point of view. It's a woman's point of view. I'm a feminist. The girl is feminist, if she would name it that, Rosie, our lead girl. And noir, because I didn't want to do a slasher horror picture. I wanted it to be sort of an elevated genre. So you could talk about things in a way that were appealing to that commercial side of it, but also elevate the dialogue a little bit, whether it's in the visual style of it or the music composition, the original score, or the storytelling.
And all three of those we're going to get to those points as well. Amazing. But also the soundtrack, but I'll let others jump in.
Well, I know your background. When I was reading your background, I thought, man, I would have loved to have been raised in that household. You come from a family of painters. Your mom and dad are painters. Your grandmother is a painter or painters. You were in a punk rock band at some point in your life. Your education is kind of theater. Is it expression theater or creative theater? Or
no, it's
experiential theater.
Experimental film.
Yeah.
So just to rewind a tiny bit. So my grandfather was the painter. My mother was artistic, but not a painter. My father actually wasn't. He was a very straight-laced guy. So he was the straight-laced, dad, Ukrainian American. That's where I get the fun last name from. And he met my mother in Paris when she was running around with my aunt, Leslie Himes, who was the wife of Chester Himes, the Black American writer who wrote Cotton Comes to Harlem and Rage in Harlem and all that stuff. So you're right. I did grow up I met Chester and Leslie when I was, a baby. And we visited them a lot when we were living in Berlin because my father was in Air Force intelligence. So it was a very interesting household, but for different reasons also. Yeah. And then anyway, I'll let you continue, but yeah.
Well, as you talk about feminism, I just kind of wondered, at what point did you become aware of that? At what point, how did that upbringing inform your feminism and your sense of womanhood?
Well, I was brought up by an incredibly independent, strong-willed survivor of a woman who had been brought up, in England during an era of deprivation. She was very sort of upper class, but, particularly, Alexis, you probably understand because you understand the Brits maybe even more. You have more of an insight into us, but you can be somewhat on the skids, but still be someone who has, this family background. So she was someone who didn't have a good education because girls didn't at that time. But she really, she was a striver and she stuck up for herself. And I was raised with constant stories. She was a really interesting person, but I was raised with constant stories about, how she'd survived rough and tumble life of being out on her own. And she didn't take any shorts, and she did not put up with, being diminished in any way, which really taught me a lot. Also, she had very strong relationships with her female friends. I saw that there was this incredible mutual respect between them. Sometimes they would fight like sisters, like my Aunt Leslie that I talked about. She was my aunt by best friendship. They knew each other since they were 17, 18. They actually moved to Paris together to get away from rationing in England after World War II. So they have a story, I have to write that story because that's, it's fascinating. I can't even get into it. Leslie stayed with circus entertainers in a circus tent when she was working at the Herald Tribune. She wrote a fashion column for Herald Tribune called Monica, and that's how she met Chester because she went to interview him. But anyway, I'm digressing. But there are tons of stories in that. A bit like Gaylord, your friend. But yeah, lots and lots of stories. But yeah, I think being raised by a woman, and my father died when I was 12, So I was raised by a single mother, and Amanda, being a single mom, you really have to get out there and stick up for yourself and stick up for your kids, and and set a good example, and that's really what she did. But she never took any shorts. She didn't allow men to diminish her, even in an era when they would try. The mediocre ones would, anyway.
They're still trying.
Yeah, exactly. Sarah, we could just kind of focus in on one, like, what is your most salient memory that you have of your mom? Perhaps an exchange that you had with her, or something you observed that really kind of impacted where you are today.
Ooh, Katherine, that's a very big question. I have so many memories of her. I think I would like to give all right, I will tell you a story that she told me. I wasn't there when it happened, but this is something that really informed who I am and my worldview and values. She married my father, as I said. He was an Air Force intelligence guy. And she was, kind of a artistic bohemian girl running around Paris. She ended up being stationed in Montgomery, Alabama in the late 1950s, as a young woman who'd been very independent, did her own thing. And they lived off base, and she had to entertain the other officers' wives. He was a young officer. And she did, they did bridge and stuff like that, very Mad Men of the day. And they had bridge parties. And she invited a lot of the women from the base to her bridge party. And she wanted to invite actually a young Black lieutenant's wife. And she wasn't allowed to because of the segregation there, which was shocking. And she, got into an argument with my dad about it. And he said, "Don't rock the boat, Christina. That's not happening." And so she's having this little, Petit Fours bridge party. And one of the women starts saying, all these Jews are coming down here and da-da-da-da-da, and started saying all these anti-Semitic things. This is my mom, who's a very cosmopolitan woman. And the way she told me the story was so funny. She would say, "Oh, Sarah, they were awful. These little small-minded people." And she said, she's a bit like Auntie Mame. She said, I said, "Well, I hope you like me because I'm Jewish." And they all kind of shut up, and they're all, like fake polite. And she said, "Oh, then I had to bloody pretend I was Jewish for 4 years." So that's my mom. That's one of many stories my mom has.
Oh, we're in love with her already, Sarah.
That's a short film right there. Yeah. Go ahead, Amanda. Go ahead.
I was interested because you are the writer and the director of this film. So I'm curious, you mentioned that this came, the process began before the Me Too movement, which was 4 years ago. So I'm just curious, where you got the idea, the inspiration, and started writing about it. But also, did you always know you wanted to direct it? I remember when we talked about Mari being a mutual friend, and Mari had written Diary of a Teenage Girl, and that was her baby, and she never knew she was going to direct it, and then she ended up directing it. Did you know right away, like, "No, this is my baby, I'm going to write it, I'm going to direct it," and you had it all visualized in your head? What was that process? So when did it start, and did you always know that you were going to direct this? Amazing.
Yes, because I came to this a little bit back to front. I had been directing a lot for many years. I started doing, as Alexis said, experimental film, and then I went on to doing music videos. Like back in the day, I used to know, Puffy and people like that at Uptown Records, and Andre Harrell and people like that. And I got into doing hip hop music videos, which was my genre of choice at the time, which was just the bomb and so much fun. I had to transition out of it because it was really, a very macho world at the time. And I would get this weird, like, "Oh, that white girl who does that artsy stuff, get her to do," so I got some cool things to do. I did like the Queen Latifah music video that was not the rap one, How Do I Love Thee? I did some, anyway, it was a long story. So I transitioned into doing commercials by using these videos. I kind of cut them down and made them into look like commercials. And I sold myself as a spec director. A lot of people didn't know there were even spec spots. So that was great. And I got into doing commercials, which afforded me this incredible set of toys. You know, I could use Luma cranes. I could use, back in the day, you know, the Unilux program to do this incredible slow-mo. We were, of course, shooting on 35mm film then. And, you know, I did reverse dye transfer on some 60mm film, where you get reversal film, which is like slide film versus negative. It's all technical. I'm not that technical, but I know what I like the look of. And so I was afforded the ability to experiment. And I came from an experimental background in my arts, you know, because I started as a painter and then went into experimental film. So, you know, it's like it was, and I also had the support and ability to pick the brains of really smart DPs and editors and sat with them. So I always saw myself as a director first, not as a writer. And so I knew that I wanted to get more into doing film. So then I went kind of returned by going into studying acting. And I think Mary started as an actor and then started writing and then went directing. So it's kind of the opposite. Wow. And I studied at the Actors Studio as an observing director for 2 years. I went twice a week with this wonderful older gentleman that I met. And Alexis, you'll love the story. His name was Salem Ludwig, one of the founding members of the Actors Studio. And I'd met him through an acting class I did. And he goes, "Oh, you don't need to do this class. Just come with me. I'll take you to the Actors Studio and come twice a week." And he knew, you know, Elia Kazan, he knew Norman Mailer, he knew all these incredible people, you know, back in the day. And we used to go and have coffee after. So it was like a real life education also, not just a, you know, an education of watching Al Pacino work with actors or, you know, Estelle Parsons or people like that. So then I was like, all right, I need to make a movie. But I was scared. And this is the honest truth. I was scared to do it because I could do my little 30-second things, but I couldn't put my shoulder behind it. So I ended up optioning a short story that that I produced, and another director made the film called Flora's Garment Bursting into Bloom, which was a very early trans love story, which was beautiful, about Flora and falling in love with this guy who's a straight sort of working class Irish guy. So it, you know, and I learned so much because I did it all, you know, soup to nuts as the producer. And after I did it, I said, oh, I could do this. So then I sat down and I started studying writing. So meanwhile, in between all this, I'm doing my little gigs, you know, my little money gigs. And then I started writing. Great teacher, Deirdre Fishel, who actually just had a documentary, is playing currently on PBS called Women in Blue, about women police officers in Minneapolis. I recommend it highly, a feature doc. But anyway, she was my screenwriting teacher. She was incredible. And then I finally sat down and spat out some solid scripts. And then I was like, okay, I'm ready to do my film. So it you know, it's like the overnight success thing that takes, you know, 15 years. So then, as I was saying before, that I started looking at different things, and I knew, having produced a movie, you're with something. I mean, you guys know, when you do a creative project, you're not with it for a year, you're with it for years, honestly, from development, inception, completion, execution. So I thought, let me do something I care about. So I read about this one young woman called Amanda Todd, who at 13 had taken her own life because she'd been sexploited and bullied and slut-shamed by her peers. And basically, the guy who they eventually caught, who had done this to her, because he basically catfished and friended all her friends on Facebook, and then exposed pictures where she had flashed him on this like talent website. Yeah, it's a really sad story, and not only sad but infuriating. You know, for anyone who has kids or cares about. I don't have kids; I'm childless, but I definitely care about them, and I really was infuriated by it. And the fact that there weren't even laws on the books. You know, sexploitation, when I first started writing this, is only a federal crime in like 5 states. It may be a few more now. I don't know, though. You know where we are with that. But I just thought, let's shine some light on this. And so I wrote it to direct. is the very long answer to your question.
And it sounds like you had lots of mentors along the way, right?
Yes.
Who guided you and gave you that kind of insider access. But yeah, to do it in reverse, like you said, to produce and then learn the acting side and learn the writing side, it's just phenomenal. But you kept working on the crafts and coming from every direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think go ahead, Alexis.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm just hearing you talk about how long ago this started, and the long lengths of time and how you thought about it and how it impacted you, and then to come to today, and to see how, with the pandemic, with everybody online, how timely this movie, this film is just so incredible to me, to kind of hear that you had such foresight back then. And it was really your anger kind of driving at this. Yeah, Amanda, I've got goosebumps too to hear this.
Because it's I just think sorry to interrupt, but you're seeing it as the child psychologist. I'm seeing it as a mother, right? I've already, had to sit my son down and have the conversation because someone committed suicide, and he comes and tells me, "Oh, Mom, this friend committed suicide." And I'm like, "What friend? Where?" "Oh, a friend from," and he'd probably kill me for saying this, but a friend that we met online. And so then it's this whole, okay, well, where did you meet the friend? Or is it a virtual friend? Are they real? And it's just, there's so much that as parents have had to deal with before, but now with the pandemic, they're online constantly. And there were predators out there, and it's scary.
And given that, as I listen to you talk and the passion that this kind of conversation engenders, right? The primary passion it engenders, or the primary emotion it engenders, is certainly anger, right? There's certainly this kind of primary emotion that drives that. So in doing the film, how do you then bring a complexity to all the characters, knowing that this is a very charged emotional engagement that you're presenting, not only as a narrative, right, but in a balanced, complex way, so we don't have one-dimensional characters? What does it take for you as a writer to go beyond the anger, or to go into the anger and find complexity?
Good question. They always say that characters are points of view, so you can create your different points of view when you start building the characters. But I don't think that many people who aren't of the privileged class of, middle-class white males don't have a shortcut to their anger. We are all walking around maintaining, I think. I tend to be a very positive, glass half full, optimistic person, but I still have this well of anger. I'm infuriated, maybe because of how my mother raised me. That unfairness is not cool, that prejudice is not cool, that bullying is not cool. It's I'm not going to say I'm walking around my neighborhood raging, but all of us we can dip into that, and as a creative person, as an artistic person, there's always that there. And it's actually really interesting. I think that when I started doing those acting classes, I had shut down a lot of my emotional life to survive. I was out on my own at 16. I was a young girl who could have been preyed on. I very luckily fell in with some wonderful people who were really looked out for me. But I had to repress a lot of stuff. And, Dr. Katherine, you know what I'm talking about, particularly when you're, a young person. It's considered soft or not cool to show emotion too much. And I had almost unconsciously just pressed a lot of stuff down. So when I started doing acting classes again, there was this guy, Salem, going, well, you have to cry about something. Bring in an object to the class that will promote some emotion. And I was like, do I have to do this? Like, can't it just be funny or, angry? Because under all anger is pain.
Yes.
And so I started doing it, and I joked with my boyfriend at the time. I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to stop crying, because I would see the ad on TV for someone saving pennies in a jar for a college fund, and I'd start crying, or, it was crazy. And I considered myself, a tough girl who'd sort of survived on her own, and, doing these hip hop videos, being a man's world, and, all this stuff. But, I feel like I'm segueing way off, but I think that to answer your question, finding the space for your characters, you dig into yourself, and then you put yourself, I imagined when I wrote the Mark Menchaca character, that's not him, that's me tied to that pole. And I'm thinking, how would I get out of this? And I'm trying to say I didn't, do something that I didn't do, but how do you, it's a false, what do you call it? A false negative? No, what's that expression? Anyway, I don't know. But it's something you can't say you didn't do if you didn't do it. So the frustration there also. And then, writing, all the characters also are culpable and they all carry guilt. So it's how do they, get rid of that guilt? It's a better word than get rid of, but I can't think of right now. Express, almost like you express a boil, something. How do you get rid of the guilt without damaging others? And that's the age-old question, isn't it? So and it's very complicated, because as you write it, you kind of have to track the storyline of, oh, she just did this, but he's thinking that, but she's only showing this, but he's showing that. And a lot of it is about, I think a lot of artists who maybe have had challenged childhoods are used to thinking outside of the box. Like, how am I going to survive this? How am I going to get through this? How am I going to make this a positive outcome? Anyway.
No, I think so we talk about different lenses. I see this through the lens of a mother. I see it through the lens of a single mom. I see it through the lens of just a female, right? A successful businesswoman, still operating in a male world. And I see it as a survivor, right, of sexual violence. And so it's interesting because you're talking about empathy, right? And when you need to write a piece and you're speaking in the voice of different characters, you have to have that ability to put yourself, it's like a little kid, put yourself in the other person's shoes, which I think this young generation does better than anyone I've ever seen. But it was interesting. I noticed like there were so many different lenses that I was looking at it from, that I'm like, oh, I feel bad, but then wait, she's bad now, and he's not bad, and but before I had that mob mentality. This is a thriller. And it talks about revenge. And so as a survivor, I'm like, get him. But then you're like, but no, he's still a human being. And what if that kind of roller coaster? I don't know. What do you guys think? Alexis, being a male watching it, and Kathy, also being a female. Did you have that where you kept kind of flipping back and forth? And I mean, especially with what's going on in the Capitol and that mob mentality, I just see there's so many parallels.
I have to acknowledge, I love films that do that to me, because that's the complexity of emotions and complexity of empathy too, right? And so I tend towards these movies, and I really feel them much more deeply. And I believe that I come out slightly different, or sometimes very different, in who I am after experiencing these various complex emotions and the different levels of not just empathy, but compassion. And I also have to acknowledge, Sarah, I do that for kids too, for my kids, my teens. I don't want them to watch the kind of Disney, one person's always bad and the other, the very black and white, or all good or not good. And I think that this teaches us a lot about humans. And so that, it's not just, I think there's a lot of different things that this movie you can look at it from, but it's also this teaching tool that you can use or experience.
I love that you say that. I love that you say that. I mean, that was my goal, because I didn't want to endorse vigilantism. I didn't want it to be a Lifetime special where she kicks his ass and blows his trailer up or whatever. You know, that doesn't solve the problem. That doesn't make this stuff go away. And it doesn't talk about the toxicity. You know, male toxicity hurts men as well as it hurts women. It doesn't talk about, you know, patriarchal abuse, you know, and sexual abuse. So, yeah, I mean, you know, she abuses, he abuses. He was, you know, the fruit of his behavior is in his son, and his son is part of the problem. And, you know, when you talk about this sort of behavior, you know, like the documentary, I know, and I want to hear what Alexis has to say too, but I just wanted to jump in, and I love that you love the complexity, because I don't like a film that's just, that's it, tied up with a bow. Right. And a lot of people, I've been at screenings where people have been pissed off at me. They're like, what the hell was that ending? And I'm like, well, good. It pissed you off a little bit. Maybe it'll stay with you and you'll think about it instead of going home and not thinking about it. You know, the documentary that really pushed me to make this film was the documentary Audrey and Daisy that if you haven't seen, I recommend highly. It is about two young women who were sexually abused. One of them was Audrey. Both were 14 years old, and the filmmakers found them separately. Audrey had killed herself because of her sexual abuse, her shame and hurt and trauma. And Daisy had survived, but she had her family had been driven out of the town that she lived in by bullying, because the school athletes that had abused her and left her for dead on her front lawn. Her hair was actually frozen to the ground when her mother found her. This is how awful it was. And they were just these football player boys who, one of their dads was a local councilman in a small town in the Midwest. And the kids, of course, got off with a slap on the wrist. And she had asked for it. And she was a slut and blah, blah, blah. At 14. And these are boys who were like 18 years old. They didn't get charged, or maybe 17 because it was under 18. But and they were friends of her brothers, so she trusted them, but he wasn't there. And it really talks about, the documentary really talks about how toxic masculinity, and Roll Red Roll is another great film that's made, you should talk to her actually, by a good friend of mine called Nancy Schwartzman. It's toured across the States. PBS showed it, but it had amazing panels that went with screenings, which was really great. But a similar thing, it was based on the Steubenville rape, and a citizen journalist who actually cracked the case and brought the boys to justice by following their Twitter feeds and their social. She managed to out them. And then the whole town, it turns out, was hiding these boys, again, student athletes. Wow. You know, towns love their football players, and they can somehow get away with murder, literally. You know, and definitely sexual assault. But yes, I've gone off on one again. But yes, I appreciate that you liked the complexity of it, and not settling for an easy answer, because, you know, toxic masculinity hurts the boys that perpetuate it, as well as the young people who suffer from it. Yeah, and I wanted to leave the dialogue open and piss some people off. So hopefully there'll be more talk about it. And Alexis, you were going to say something.
No, the complexity of it is, you know, there's so much emotion that this movie invites, you know, all at the same time. And I can't tell at a certain point if I'm feeling empathy or rage, if I'm perplexed, if I'm on the side of any one of the characters at any point in time. So there's this plethora, this sensory thing that happens as I'm watching it. And I love the fact that you just said that was me tied in the basement. That wasn't him, that was me. Because there's a scene in the film, I thought, I've got to ask her about this scene and what happened there, where she comes into the basement, and this is without giving the film away. She comes into the basement and she's speaking with him. And at a certain point, she lies on the floor, and then he lies on the floor with her. Contextually, this is not what should be happening. Contextually, this created a dissonance within me, and I thought, okay, let me see where this is going, right? And then there's a dialogue that ensues between the two of them. And so for me, there was so much going on. I wanted to, Kurosawa was also a painter. And I felt at that point I went from looking at a film to looking at a series of paintings, right? Very much like Kurosawa in Run. I wanted to like freeze frame and freeze frame and freeze frame. And I don't want to make this longer than it needs to be. But let me just cut to the chase. What were you thinking with these two people lying on the concrete in the basement and just speaking to each other that way? What were you hoping to convey with that? Because that was, to me, such a powerful moment of the metaphor of two guys in the middle of the ocean, and they've been lost at sea for a number of years. And finally, in an argument, both seated on different sides of the boat, this guy looks over at this guy and says, "There's a hole in your side of the canoe." We're all in this together. I mean, this is our canoe. This is our little blue dot. This is our universe. And we're collectively, inextricably bound to each other. So all of that is to say, at that moment, all that came to my mind. So can you tell me about the character development that was happening around that and what you were inviting us to look at?
Well, I could barely put it better than you just have, but yes, it was all about creating, that was the climax of the movie. You'd think it was the action stuff towards the end, but really to me, that was the climax of the movie where they found a intimacy, a congress, where they almost crossed over into each other in a metaphysical way.
Yeah.
Vulnerability I think the word that
they both just let themselves go. I mean, I was also very, very aware of the physical space of Sarah next to Mark, the actors, that she could never get closer than where he could grab her, though, because then that would take away the disbelief, that junction of disbelief where you're like, well, why didn't you just grab her? So it was this intimacy, this dance where they lay down next to each other. And it actually came to me because I knew I wanted to create intimacy with them, but I didn't quite know how I was going to do that. Would it be they start tussling, or would it be through verbal, or would it be physical, or I didn't know, or a revelation. This is as I was writing it. And I have a good friend who's an actor called Dennis O'Hare, who was in American Horror Story and every movie you've ever seen. He True Blood, King of Mississippi, movies, Dallas Buyers Club, anyway. And he reads tons of scripts. That's why one of the reasons I wanted to mention him, because that he's been in so many things and he's been in so many plays. I said, can you just read my script and tell me what you think? And he loved it, and he was very, very supportive of it. But he said, and this is the first draft, he said, you should have them sort of sit next to each other, mirroring each other's physicality. And initially in the script, I wrote a scene where she actually goes out of the bomb shelter and he's sitting inside, and they're back to back, like mirrored like this, but in two different locations with a split between them. And I filmed that because I thought it was such a kind of clever visual. But it took all the emotion away. It's like writers and directors and people, creative people, often do that. When you take the drama off screen, or you take the pressure off, the pressure cooker. I'm like, why would I do that? They need to be as close as possible to each other. They need to be right next to each other. They need to be able to smell each other in an animal way, that they can then have this intimacy where they become one. And that's why I did those almost uncomfortable, and as you know, there's a song that underlines this, but the uncomfortable proximity of the camera to their faces. I remember when I framed them up at that one point, the DP even said, are you sure you want to do this? It feels too close. And I was like, I understand. And that's exactly how I want it to feel. I want it to feel too close. I want it to feel almost ugly. I want it to feel like you have a microscope in their faces. So when you're watching it, you get that slightly uncomfortable feeling, and you become both of them as the viewer. That was my hope. But thank you for noticing that and calling that out. It was really a honor to work with those two actors, because they brought it, and the intimacy and the emotion that they brought was incredible. Because if they hadn't brought it, it wouldn't have worked. The scene would not have worked.
It was so intense, and you're crawling out of your skin, but at the same time, you're saying there's this letting go and this kind of truce happening, and taking the camera and getting close up into their eyes. I mean, they, as actors, they were absolutely amazing in the way that they would just display that emotion from the beginning too, right?
Yeah.
The beginning of the film, I loved it because there was a sense of nostalgia. And the way you captured those feelings of, oh my gosh, these teenagers are so conflicted and they're trying to be independent, but they also want to belong. And, like, the football field and being a cheerleader, the pressures, it was beautiful.
And one reviewer mentioned about the dialogue of the teens, because I actually had a 16-year-old read the script, and I said, can you pull out anything that sounds corny or not of your generation, and anything? And she really gave it the stamp of approval, which I was really proud of, because I actually just sat and listened to tons of YouTube videos, tons and tons and tons of them, to kind of get the cadence and the language. Obviously it's very specific to one place in the world, but one reviewer said that the dialogue of the teens nailed the casual cruelty that teens can indulge in. And it's what I was talking about before, that protection level that you have to show you don't have feelings a little bit to be tough and to be functional in the teen world. I mean, Katherine, I'm sure you see a lot of that.
Yeah. I just going to go back to what Alexis and Amanda just pointed out, though, with that scene. And you were talking about the emotions that you really, as a director, yes, the actors did an incredible job. And at the same time, as a director, you made sure, even when you were asked, are you sure you want this? You went really close to them. And what I noticed with that is it's very similar to the experience I had with, like, for example, Free Tibet. The films that you make draw emotion. They're very evocative. And that's what they're really pulling out of their viewers. And at the same time, your kind of loftier goal is, dare I say, like activism. And so it is, to tap into your emotions, whether it's anger or this complexity of anger, to move you to action, which with this topic, and that, again, I'm getting my goosebumps, is for those who may feel a little removed from it, adolescent suicide for girls is the number 2 leading cause of death worldwide, according to WHO. So it is here. It is everywhere around us. There are, no countries that we can escape from this, including the States. And last year, it was at record levels for teen girls. So I cannot think of a time or piece for you to move people to action by evoking, these feelings in them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll try not to cry when I talk about this, but the documentary that I mentioned, Audrey and Daisy, I think it was about 2 months ago, Daisy Coleman, who had started a foundation for young women called Safe Bay, to help women who had been abused and trafficked and exploited, took her own life at 23. So she survived from 14 to 23, but the trauma of her assault and the fallout from it became too much for her. And she, if you Google her, she was a beautiful, beautiful young woman who I Facebook messaged with after I first saw the documentary, 5 years ago. And we had a little exchange, and, I said, if there's anything I can ever do to help you, and blah, 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 please reach out. And she was very sweet. But it really broke my heart, because you'll see at the time what a beautiful young woman she was. And then that this happened. And then a little under a month ago, her mother ended up taking her own life. So it was just this family. Her mother had been a town veterinarian in this town where it had happened to her daughter. She felt she couldn't protect her. The father, I think, passed away in a car crash, and that's when the family got driven out of the town and bullied out of their own town. And I think it was just too much for them. And I think that, I know this is an incredible downer, but if we don't talk about it, things won't change. For women to own their anger, to own their own path in life, to say no, to know about how to build boundaries for themselves, and to reach out to friends and family that may be going through stuff like this. What is it? They say every homicide's a suicide and every suicide's a homicide. There's a lot of activity in lots of different communities that are expressions of extreme pain. And one thing I would say that was really positive for me that came out of this was that Sarah Rich, who played Rosie, said in an interview we did that she loved being to access that side of herself, the angry side, the say no side, her powerhouse side. And she'd been raised in the South, in Virginia. And she said, I've been raised to only show one side of femininity. And she said, this is very much another side of femininity that's completely acceptable and that we need to all explore. Don't do anything bad to people, but allow yourself the anger, allow yourself the expression.
I think that's what film and art does. I think you use the word repressed, when you was an actor and you had to access that, you realize and I love the language, I had to repress to survive, right? I mean, I feel the weight of that, even within the masculine construct. And I don't want to do a compare and contrast because we're talking about what it means to be a young woman. And I don't want to compare and contrast to say, well, being a man is easy.
But how wonderful that the film would speak to you. How wonderful that the film would speak to you that way. That's what art does, right? It transcends the cases that we're in.
And I think art gives us a place to deal with that repression, right? Because at a certain point, we're all angry, we're all raging, we're all living uncertainty. We all live in a fear of death, a fear of loss. And that's the collective boat we're sailing in, right? And then when you go to art, art is that portal through which we can give a healthy expression to what we have to repress, right? And so your film does that in a way that, even after the film ended, it was still playing in my mind, right? The film was over, but it was still going on there. When you talk about your writing, from just a minute, when you're writing, which everybody says writing is quite solitary. Do you play music? Do you sit in a room by yourself and you have absolute silence? Are you putting on James Brown or some punk music, or a combination of James Brown, punk music, and Pavarotti? What's the writing?
Hip hop.
Hip hop. I mean, is Puffy in the background when you're writing?
I will always have Tribe Called Quest in my playlist, but I'm old school like that. I'm East Coast old school, but yes. So it was really interesting. The writing process for me was really informed by meeting some film fatales. And I don't know if you all know about this group. They're based all over the world, but it was started by a woman called Leah Meyerhoff. She was an NYU student. Mary is also a NYU grad, and fatale. And I started meeting all these women because I felt very isolated because I was very much in a man's world doing my filmmaking. And when I started meeting all these different women, they would do, in the early days, they would just have a small dinner party. And I remember going to one at Rai Russo Young's house, who is a great director who did Nobody Walks. She directed a script by Lena Dunham, which is great. I recommend it highly. But she had thrown this dinner party, and what they would do is throw a dinner party, and then everyone would go around and introduce themselves. Just a quick, my name is, this is a project I'm working on, or this is what I want to do. And you'd have a circle, and then the hostess would put a conversation starter. I could see you guys doing this when the pandemic's over. Do this, it's great. So the hostess does a conversation starter, and you have an hour just to have a conversation around whatever this subject is. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of it, everyone gets to have an ask, which I found incredibly potent, because we're not used to asking directly for what we want. And actually then have people come and say, how can I help you? So then everyone would have a simple ask, and people would meet up after, that conversation before the end of the evening. And I'm telling you the whole thing because you guys need to do this salon on the West Coast. But and it can be any organizing principle. This just happened to be female directors. But when we had the conversation, there was a conversation exactly about this, like, how do you work, and particularly as a writer, if you're getting blocked or whatever. And this one young woman, because I felt like I'm new to writing, I know how to be on set, I know how to make images, I know how to do storyboards and prep as a producer, but I didn't really know how to create my atmosphere. And there's this young woman, I totally spacing on her name, I apologize to her, but she said, what I tend to do is I will start just with some images out on a table. I will pour myself a glass of red wine, and I will put on some very, very loud music. And one night I was doing this, and my boyfriend came home, and he stuck his head in the door, and he went, I see you're montaging. I was like, that is a great way to frame it. Yeah. So I definitely montage before I start writing. And it's even before you start doing, dialogue or anything like that. You just want to build in your own head, like almost get it into your DNA, into your cellular DNA. What is the world? What is the story? So I would sit and pull pictures from the internet. I would listen to like hours of these teenagers talking on YouTube. I obviously did my research about the different young women I was, thinking about. But then I started writing, and I would just write down snatches of dialogue, and the story started forming in my head about, okay, this is the kind of story I want to tell. And then I just used a very simple structure. It's in all the screenplay playbooks. You have your inciting incident at sort of page 10. You have your theme stated around page 5. Your end of your first act is around, I used a 3-act structure. Your end of your first act is around page 22. Everything is all mutable. But, if you go to my film around 4 minutes in, you'll have Jolene Marquez, who plays Stacy, say to Rosie, hey, not everything's what it looks like. In other words, not everything is what it seems. And then once you have your theme, every scene will go back to the theme. Is Mark Menchaca who he seems? Is Rosie who she seems? Are her friends who they seem? Is Rory who he seems? Is the situation what it seems? And so yeah, it's a combination of intuitive work with structure applied, and you grow through the training. The vines go through the training of the frame.
And that's the internet. Is the internet what it seems, right?
Of course.
Seems. Who's
Ultimately.
Yellow pants, right?
So well said. Yes. Is our predator who he seems to be.
Right. Which is the huge struggle. I'm curious about how you created the suspense. So a lot of people will look at film and talk about the writing, the scripts, they'll look at lighting, maybe costumes, set design, the soundtrack, right? The writing got me, but that one song, like, do I make you uncomfortable?
Well, it's funny. It's fun. It's a great song. It's by a band called Juxt, Juxt. Okay. They're out of the DC area. Really talented young band. Very interesting. They make their own music. They make their own videos. And so when I wrote the script, I actually had Justin Bieber's Sorry in that scene. I had Rosie humming it. So it's like sarcastic little weird thing that she's doing, which is, totally her mentality. But when I discovered that even if I re-recorded the song just for the publishing rights, it would be the whole budget of my movie. Woo! So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna, Justin Bieber cannot have my money. I don't have the money to give him. But so then I just started, I was like, how am I ever going to replace this? So Sarah had been humming it in the scene. I said, do the scene humming it and do a version without you humming it, because in case we can't get it. And of course, you know, I couldn't do everything all at once. So I didn't know if we could get it or not. And so then I was kind of screwed, because if you think about that song, it's a very irreplaceable song. I thought I'll never find anything that could do the same, you know, carry the same weight and do the same lifting, the heavy lifting that song had to do. So then I just went online, went on YouTube and just started looking, listening. And I stumbled on these guys, and I can't even remember how I stumbled on them. There was a girl band in England that I was looking for Rosie's crazy dance scene, because that's another big shift when she does that crazy dance when she's doing a slumber party with the girls. And that was, you know, I had like some Joan Jett song in there or something, you know, some angry, punky, feministy song. But I ended up going with the Riot Brides for that, which is just such a great song. You have to Google the Riot Brides. They're on the West Coast. I believe they're in LA. Abby Genet is the leader. But and you know, all these musicians allowed me to license their music for very, very little. And I said, well, just keep the rights to it. I don't need to own the rights. You keep the rights and allow me to use it. But yeah, that song is really, you know, it's an annoying song because it's used in an annoying way.
very antagonizing.
It's perfect.
It's perfect. It's antagonizing. It gets into you. It creeps into you, and it reminded me of like like a little kid that's teasing, but it's so in your face, and the message is so clear. Like, do I make you uncomfortable? Right?
That scene was supposed to make you uncomfortable as the audience, make him uncomfortable.
But it really resonated, because how many times as women, and maybe as men, right, with Alexis and Gaylord in Grenada story, have we felt uncomfortable? And so that it really encaptured what it feels like when someone is crossing the line. You know, the hands start moving or the inappropriate touching, right? It really got under your skin. And I think as a thriller, you know, you're trying to push that feeling of tension.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it also was adolescent at the same time. So I don't know, that really stuck with me. I catch myself singing it in the shower, and I'm like, wait, maybe I shouldn't have divulged that. Anyway.
You know, your cast, you know.
No, I love it.
Speaking to that, your cast is like super young. And I'm thinking, as a director, it's one thing to direct, for the lack of a better word, adults, right? A seasoned professional actor who's, you know, either well-known or has done theater or films and all that. But then you look at the cast. Cast is quite young. So what is the art of a director directing a very young cast, because they don't have life experiences to really draw on to any great extent? So how is directing a young cast different than directing what you would call seasoned actors?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I actually cast people who were older than the roles they played for that very reason, because I didn't want to deal with, first of all, you have to give them a lot more breaks. Even though this was a DGA job, it was not union. So, actually, no, it was SAG. It was SAG approved too. So I would have had to do incredible amounts of breaks. I've shot lots of kids for commercials, so I felt, you know, I knew what it meant to work with kids. And these guys are all older. They're all above 18, but they played very young, very well, I think. But the one cast member that I had to have as young was obviously her younger sister, Amelia, who was played by Samantha Dunn, Sam Dunn, who is just a little angel. And she was 13 when she did it, 13. And when you work with children that young or younger, often you have to model for them. You tell them the story, you don't talk down to people. You tell them the story. They know what they're supposed to be doing, but then sometimes you'll model for them, or you'll even have a conversation with them. So the way I actually shot Amelia, I just shot her myself in this very workroom I'm sitting in. And her mom just waited upstairs, and I just said, okay, we're all good. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to have these lights on. This is the story. She already knew what the story was, but, and the other thing too, is that I didn't want to create anything traumatic for her. So it was complicated. And also you don't want to have the characters relive or in any way, have it be exploitative of young people. So you can't, I didn't want to show anything. I had to infer a lot, and I didn't want her to really hear everything that the character had to go through. So I would feed her a lot of the lines. So instead of learning a script, because I think with kids, also kid actors, unless you get that really young Jodie Foster or whatever, the kid, it's or Haley Joe Osment or whatever, Oswald. Anyway, in his movies early on, you will get a read, like an actory child's read. So what I did was, okay, this is a story. This is what we're doing. Just paraphrase. Just tell me what you're feeling, because the man is bothering you. How do you feel about that? And I recorded it on my laptop. So she was just in a space with a laptop talking to it. And she was phenomenal. And the things that she brought were really great. And then I talked about, bullying, and she had been bullied as a kid in a school she went to. So she talked about being bullied. And, I didn't end up using a lot of her footage because we didn't need a lot of it. And I also didn't want to weigh the front end down with that. But we also needed enough of her to connect and care about her and see that Rosie would care about her. So she wasn't just a dead character in the background. She had to exist somehow. So doing the video was great. And also it was really great for, I gave Sarah Rich copies of the videos so she could watch them privately, the longer version, so she could get a sense of who her sister was. And then just before we shot, I had them both come to my house here in Brooklyn, and we did family photographs. So they got to hang out. So we just had them, improving with each other and hanging out and feeling each other out a little bit. So Sarah Rich had this sense memory of who her sister really was.
I think about that too, because when you're talking about kids and films and you don't want them to relive the trauma, it just makes me think of like The Sixth Sense, like here's this little kid and your line is, I see dead people. Like, what? That sounds really dark. Or Kirsten Dunst, where she's like, well, doesn't she get to kiss Tom Cruise? So that's not so bad. But, she plays a little vampire. So from a child psychologist perspective, I mean, that just fascinates me. How do you deal with, because these are very important topics. So how do you bring them to light on camera, but also protect the child, right? From the trauma.
Katherine would know really how to do that. But I think I just put myself in the shoes of the kids, the adult actors, they played teens, but they're adults. But with Sam, who played Amelia, kids like creepy things. They also like creepy things. They like ghost stories and yucky things and gross things. I think you just need to put it in a framing that they understand it, that's not threatening to them. That's, for me.
Yeah, I think for us as the viewers, we experience it as being very realistic. And I think for them, though, just like Sarah, you're absolutely on point. For them, it's a fantasy world. And I tell you, my kids like way gorier and, fantasy stuff that I can't even imagine. I don't even want to look at that because it would just give me nightmares at night. But it doesn't for them, even though it should, that you would expect it to because they're younger. But for them, it's not realistic. It's not real life. And I imagine as they're filming it, perhaps it's very removed from the experience we're getting. They're not getting the creepy music or,
right.
some of the things that help us to feel those emotions of disgust or scared.
Right. I really appreciate you guys thinking about this film in such a way, because it's rare to have the time and the space to have a dialogue. And I love that we have the different perspectives here, that you really dug into this film, because, a lot of people look at it and go, oh, it's a genre movie and that's it. They'll write it off. or they'll be frustrated with it. You guys all dug into the reasons I wanted it to be a little bit frustrating and stay with you. So I appreciate that.
Well, and to that end, I think my question is the marketing of that, bringing a film like this to market, because this is a bit of a unique genre. And so can you talk about not only the idea of making it, but then how do you take it to market, and what's the response to it, and how do you sell it?
Right. Well, I did have, I just wrote an article for Filmmaker magazine. If anyone wants to read about my distribution journey, just Google my name and Filmmaker, it'll come up, which will be helpful for folks. But I did have some offers for it. You know, it's not got huge stars in it. Mark Menchaca's star is very much on the rise, and he's fantastic. You know, see him in The Outsider and Ozark and all these different shows. But I didn't have any big offers for the film. And these days, indie film, as you guys probably know, is really struggling. You know, with the streaming wars, Netflix in 100 countries, over 100 countries now, it's really changed the landscape of independent film production. So I had some offers. My first offer was my best offer, which I didn't go with, from Canada. They actually offered, you know, a decent MG and some advertising money and stuff, but it was very much a horror slate. And I felt like I didn't want this film to sit in a horror slate, you know, next to slasher movies. I just didn't feel like it was the right home for it. And then I had some other offers, which were good, you know, from reputable distributors. But they were not financially good. That is not happening for indie film right now. But they were not, I didn't feel like they were full-throated enough. They were very sort of lukewarm, like, yeah, we'll take your film. It's a good film, solid film. You know, and I was just like, do I really want my film to just sort of go silently into that good night, you know? Or do I want it to have a bit of a tooth to it and get out there in the world? So, you know, we released a little over 2 weeks ago on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, and multiple other platforms like Hulu, not Hulu, Vudu, Fandango, Xbox, and Google Play, and some others. But I did that through a curated aggregator called Giant, where I could be in control of the advertising and how the budgets were spent, etc. Because I didn't want it to just go out there and disappear. It is a small movie, and that happens with small movies. So I hired an ad company called Submersive, and we are one of the first smaller budget films to be advertising on TikTok. And it has gone crazy, and advertising on Instagram. It's really funny because I get the stats of who is actually watching and or clicking through, at least not watching the film, but clicking through. Like, I don't know if they convert or not, but they literally give me per click who's clicking through, and they have the background. On Instagram, it's 91% women, not shockingly. The numbers I got today was 56%. Yes, upper 50s, maybe let's call it 59. I literally just read the email before I got on here. Women. And so the younger audience, more men are adopting the film, which is really interesting. But yeah, TikTok is a great audience for it because it's, you know, I wanted to very much do the, you know, social media aspect of it and not try and do print ads or go into Variety or Deadline or something like that, which is, you know, falling on deaf ears, really.
Yeah, quickly, from a marketing point of view, tell me about the title of the film. How did you come up with that?
The title of the film, Alexis, I cannot tell you how much I've been through with this title. Originally, it wasn't called this, but the more I was writing it, you know, I went for more of a title that was about the rural setting of it, and about the lead character. I won't even tell you the title, but as I dug into it more, the real invisible character in the film is the internet, and I wanted to somehow speak to that, and it would be sold as a, you know, genre thriller, but psychological, but you know, what's the realm? Is it, you know, love triangle? Is it blah, blah, blah? And I didn't want to give away the sort of revenge aspect of it. You know, I wanted people to at least get their bums in chairs to watch first. And so I knew I wanted it to be something social media oriented. And I went through tons of different things. And I know. I don't love the title, I have to say, but it's the best. I went through hundreds. I mean, I had them stuck on Post-it notes everywhere. And even my editor, who, when he's a whole story, but he started editing the film at 18, which I didn't realize he was 18. I hired him through the Edit Center, and I said, "Oh, where do you go to college?" And da 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 da. And he was, "Oh, I didn't go to college." I was like, "That doesn't matter. You don't need to go to college. You're a very, good editor." Blah. Turns out he'd been editing and doing little movies since he was 13, and was a kid who was this real entrepreneur. He came from a family that didn't have a ton of dough, and he would buy computers at yard sales and fix them up and sell them on eBay. Make computers. I mean, what an interesting kid. Anyway, the reason I mention him is he was 18. So I said, "You're my audience. You are my audience. So what do you think?" And he goes, "I hate the title. It's so corny." I was like, "Okay, come up with a better one," because I have Post-it notes all over this room we're sitting in, as you can see. And we went through all the different titles, and we ended up right back at Like, because not only does it talk about the social media thing, but the reason that abuse can happen on the internet is that there's this well of need to be liked, to be approved of, what you will do for likes, the endorphin rush, the serotonin that literally synapses in your brain and hooks into your receptors when you get those. It's like, we all know about this now, but it's a very, and you look at the Social Dilemma, the new docs that are out about it now. I mean, how we are actually trained like seals, circus seals, to respond to this kind of attention. So, it's a reminder to hold your children close, to let them be who they are, and to be a protective parent, allowing them to grow into who they are. But, not being an absent, neglectful parent, which a lot of folks are, and know that putting them in front of a pad is not necessarily the way to train their brains.
The title was spot on. And like you said,
I do too.
I mean, it made us think instantly of the internet, and like you're saying, that human need to belong and for a sense of approval. And God, man, I wish we had hours, because we could go into that topic of the internet being a role, not a person, but it's an actual role in the film. That is just fascinating. I would love to talk about who your target market is, because do you think young kids should watch it, or is it more like the teens? And I'm not trying to throw you under a bus or anything, but I think it would be so fascinating to have a conversation with you as a young female director, and maybe some other younger adults about the film and how it made them.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be doing a virtual screening here in New York that will be for younger people. I mean, I want people, I think 14, 15 and up can watch this. I mean, there's nothing you don't see anything. Even like what happens to Mark, you don't see it.
Right.
You don't see anything with Samantha. You don't see anything with Rosie. It's all very suggested. So I don't feel that there's any kind of this doesn't assault you in any way, the film, which, horror films. I've had people in audience. I had a man yell at me, goes, "It's disgusting how you treated this guy." And I was like, you watch horror films all the time with people being stabbed and nailed and I take it as a compliment, because it obviously felt real to him.
Yeah.
So, and touched him, offended him, which, this is a real compliment that I achieved that. But go ahead.
Think about what's that one? The dragon girl with the dragon tattoo?
Yeah.
Or Kill Bill. I couldn't even watch those. So talk about a survivor of sexual violence and being triggered. I think you did it in a way that was very respectful, so that people, I'm just figuring this out as I go along right now, people that are survivors of sexual violence, I didn't feel triggered. I tapped into the emotion and felt that, like, yeah, he's going to get what he deserves. But I never wanted that, right? Because an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, right? But it was interesting that you did it in a way that was respectful. So for men to be offended, okay, yeah, it shook you. But you're going to tell me Kill Bill or Girl with a Hornet, whatever it is, dragon tattoo, like that was painful to watch. That was painful.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Katherine.
Oh, no, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say that I had a conversation before I wrote it, or as I was writing it, with Nicole Cassell, who's another great, amazing director who just won for Watchmen. She did the Watchmen series, but she started out doing a great movie called The Woodsman with Kevin Bacon about a pedophile and looking at him in a different way, which I thought was very clever. And then she was working on The Killing, which was a story that took the dead girl story to a different place. And it was very interesting. And I always regret the day I said, I don't want to do a dead girl story. And I hope I never offended her. But Nicole, if you're watching, I didn't mean that. But because I'm a great admirer of her. But and that show is so well done. And again, I don't think it was exploitative, that show. But I very much I didn't want to do a dead girl story. So we only see Amelia in a positive light, like she's trying to own her stuff and talk about her stuff and process her stuff. And Rosie is allowed to be fallible because she survives, and she isn't the victim in this story, other than the victim of grieving for her sister. I wanted to show a very powerful, confused, flawed female character.
Very real characters, right? Realistic characters. Just hopping back to Amanda, you were talking about the social, I think, Sarah, you brought up social dilemma. And Amanda, you were asking about the marketing, like what are the demographics? And that's what I thought of when I watched this movie. I absolutely agree with you, Sarah, that, the younger kids or younger adolescents, that this could be certainly something that's why I think the power comes in. Right. And that's why I actually personally, but I'm kind of old, so don't take my, take it with a grain of salt. Yeah. I like the hashtag like, and I think it's because, for example, the social dilemma not social dilemma, it's social. Is it Social Dilemma?
Correct. I think it's Social Dilemma. There are two really great documentaries out right now. One is Social Dilemma.
I think it is Dilemma. Sorry. That's making its rounds on all the parent forums online, all the tech and digital parenting, all those, social media forums. And so that's what, everybody, all the parents are showing their kids, their teens, and even some preteens. And what it does is it helps to let them know, hey, you're online right now. This is part of that preventativeness. You're online, be aware. This is what the social media companies are trying to get you to do. And teens, by their very nature and part of what they're supposed to be developmentally, are rebellious. So, hey, you're trying to get me to be addicted. I'm going to show you what I'm not going to do, right? And so to me, this film, is that very, to me, logical next step. And I would like to see this kind of go around, make its rounds as a follow-up on all the boards. And particularly not just for teen girls, but for teen boys to see.
Absolutely.
And I really do think that some of them will see this in themselves, or that's what happened to my friend. And I can promise you, because I see this in my client population, they're absolutely experiencing this. And what comes after that is, Amanda, well, like depression, trauma, and Sarah, you mentioned intergenerational trauma happens too with the parents or the family members that are siblings, that are impacted by this. So I do think that in terms of marketing, I do like the title. And I do think that some of the younger kids, this would be a good film for them. Every parent, of course, it's individualized. So every parent has to watch it themselves first. I always recommend that because your child best and whether they might be triggered by it.
I so love the fact you included boys in that, because oftentimes we silo the kids. We say this is for boys, this is for girls. And we can't educate one without educating the other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and when we do that, we create a bigger problem, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. I've got a question that's a little bit different than what's going on, because Elia Kazan wrote a book called What Makes a Director? And so as I listen to you speak, I think of Catherine Bigelow, I think of Mari Heller. And can you talk about what makes a director in respect to your approach to this film, and in respect to what is the role or how women directors are impacting Hollywood right now? But Catherine Bigelow, I think, was one of the first women in recent time to even be recognized for her work. And then you have Mari and then you. So can you talk about that? Last thing also, now you have this kind of engagement of African-American female directors that are coming on in force. And I see this diversity, this kind of, what used to be a dissymmetry, if I could say that word, now becoming this coalition of women bringing just grade A work to Hollywood. So can you talk about what it takes to make a director and how the force of women are transforming Hollywood right now?
I feel like I'm living in a golden age right now for female directors. I've had to fight and claw my way just to survive doing work I didn't even want to do. And I'm not saying that all filmmakers and all creative people don't have a struggle ahead of them, but when you have two hands tied behind your back because you're a woman, it doesn't help. I'm so proud of all the sisters that I see out there doing the work that they're doing. I'm so proud of the Film Fatales network. I'm proud to be a part of it. Literally 5 to 6 years ago, I was at Sundance in a cab, taking a cab with a studio executive up the hill with my friend Rose Trichet, who's an amazing director. She worked on Vida and a bunch of different things. And she was talking to her about, well, why don't you have a woman direct that? And this is a woman, female executive, studio executive said, well, we just can't find any. We can't find any. We'd love to, of course, and it was so infuriating for me because I didn't have the stats or the numbers to tell her. I just had anecdotal reports, friends that I knew who were trying to make films. And often women couldn't prove themselves because I talked about this funding, confidence gap in funding female movies, female-led movies, either by the character or by who's behind the camera. And you do have your unusual, as they call them, the white tigers, like Catherine Bigelow, among others. But, they're like Mia DaCosta, great Black female director. She did Little Woods for a friend of mine who produced it, Gabrielle Nadig. But they couldn't get arrested before the whole Me Too thing. They're really trying to shove their way in there. Dee Rees, another amazing director. But why is Mira Nair not everyone's like a household name? The amount of films she's made, the beautiful work she's made, she has to struggle to get funded. It's Mississippi Masala On with Denzel. She did an amazing job with him. Like 25 years ago or something.
25 years ago, yeah.
But, I'm part of the DGA and we're a part of this group called the Focus on Women Committee on the East Coast. And then there's the Women's Steering Committee on the West Coast. And our diversity people did a report of TV directors. And it turned out it was 89% white males. And then the argument came from the studios, but we can't find any people of color or women to direct these things. Black men were doing a little better than women, but Black women of color were doing nothing. They were like 1% or something, or less. And then, so the diversity subcommittee said, okay, well, let's do, this is for TV shows, let's do an analysis of first-time directors so we can understand, because we get it if someone's doing a ton of work, blah, blah, blah. First-time directors was hardly any different. It was something like 83% white males. This is, film schools graduate the same number of girls and boys, maybe a few more girls than boys, young women, I should say, but than young men. But it was shocking. So it's literally prejudice, it's bias, unconscious bias. And I know I'm going off on this tangent a little bit, but I started thinking about unconscious bias and doing some research on it when I was writing this film, because another thing that pissed me off. And, they did this one test at the Sydney Opera House. They kept saying, we want more diversity in the opera. We want to have more women and people of color, Indigenous people in the opera. And they were going, oh, we just can't find them. They just don't exist. Da, da, da. So they did blind callbacks, and they had a curtain across the stage and had people walk out and perform for the strings part of the orchestra. Right. And still they only came up with 1 or 2 women. It was 90%, men that they hired. And then someone said, but you can hear them coming across the stage. You can hear the high heels of people trotting across the stage. And they said, okay, all the women take off your high heels and we're going to do this again. And they did it again. And guess what? Tons of women got hired. You know, and these are people who want to hire women, and the unconscious bias they had, even probably by women, stopped it from happening.
Quick question for you before we leave. If Hollywood had to be self-reflective, what is the question that Hollywood needs to ask itself that it really hasn't? Because when I hear you talk, I mean, and this is not a new narrative, you know, we can't find women, people of color, we can't find women. They never can find what they need to find, but they can find everything else. I always found that to be very convenient. What is the question that Hollywood needs to ask itself so that we move into this place where women are equal and people of color are equal, can bring, you know, creativity comes from anywhere. So what is the question that Hollywood needs to ask itself in respect of equity?
It's difficult because it's an industry. It's difficult because it's got a financial onus on it, and it's, you know, it's a fiscally driven industry. You know, they don't call it the film art, they call it the film industry. So, you know, but I think that one thing that was very underestimated, definitely for me coming up in my life, was that women are consumers. People of color are tastemakers. I mean, you know, particularly people who've been disenfranchised in any way tend to be the ones who are more on the edge, the cutting edge of style, of fashion, of art, of popular culture. And they're often the seers of the new world. And I think that Hollywood maybe needs to ask itself, do we want to be part of the future, or do we want to be part of the past? You know, very much, you know, everything that everyone here has been talking about is we're all in this together. You know, I like the idea of trying to create a sense of community in art, never more needed than today, and to tell stories. You know, it's really, I read the other day that there was a freed Black man in Boston who was the person who started propagating the no taxation without representation. Mm-hmm. And he was one of the instigators, obviously, just intellectually, of the Boston Tea Party. Now, if any of those people storming the Capitol knew that the things that they hold so dear were coming from him,
That's
perhaps
right.
they might look at other people who look like him a different way. You know, it's telling different stories. It's using a female gaze, a Black gaze, an Indigenous gaze, a trans or gay gaze, you know, using the stories of women who have had to deal with the trauma of sexual assault, to use the vision of folks who've been disenfranchised, working class people. You know, there's a huge culture of, you know, in the 1970s, there were these amazing films that came out of the Hollywood at the time that were, you know, like Blue Collar, for example. What an amazing film. There's a rich tradition in the storytellers of these United States that we need to delve into more and more. So anyway, I don't know how to say it in a fast way, but I would love to see different stories from different people and have Hollywood support them, not have to depend on Sundance discovering the next new voice. You know, have people really supported and encouraged. You know, Ava DuVernay is a perfect example of this. She had all female directors on her show, all female directors. She didn't even hire one man. And it was a call to action, and it was a poke in the eye to the biased system that they are there, they can do the job. They did a whole season of this TV show.
We have to do this again.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me blab away here.
No, it's been unreal. I woke up so excited to come have this conversation.
It's wonderful.
You guys are great.
Yeah, really wonderful. Really, such a pleasure to meet you. Yeah,
back at you. Alexis,
and to see you again soon.
Amanda. Yes.
So
thank you so much for thinking of me.
Yeah, you just let us know if you're up for another conversation, and we'll carve out another hour. We'll be concise now that we we know each other, because I think
You
this.
should talk to my friend Deirdre, the woman who did the documentary Women in Blue. It's incredible, that film. And yeah, just reach out to me if you want. I can connect you with so many great people.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
I love it.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys. We'll talk later. Bye. Bye.